All right, guys, now I'm going to keep it extra real with you. I have actually already opened this up, and I'm going to explain why later, but here's what matters. This is the Xbox Series S. I did go out shopping for a Series X. I did come up empty-handed. However, I have two televisions in my house, sort of a back room kind of deal, and then a real home theater game room. Home theater game room is where I want the X, but I wanted an S2 for this back room. So for me, this was perfect, but I'm going to explain later why I think you actually shouldn't buy this Series S, despite the fact that it's a really nice product. Look how adorable this thing is. Nice little cube. Like I said, I have already opened this up, but this is how it came packaged. All right, we'll worry about powering our dreams later. I'm gonna show you some comparison shots between this and the Xbox One S, but this is very small. And somehow on video, it looks bigger than it actually is. When you see it in real life, it's kind of shockingly small. What's nice about it is how narrow the box is. And it's really nice for this shelf where I keep my Xbox in that back room because it's not a super deep shelf. So this is actually perfect. Now, this vent fan, this large vent fan to keep this thing well ventilated, let me tell you, these guys have learned their lesson from the Red Ring of Death. This vent fan is probably the most controversial design choice on this console, but I actually like it. And I think it creates a lot of opportunities for custom designs. I think we're gonna see special editions with all sorts of stuff here. You know we're gonna see one with a big green X on the middle at some point, but it just seems like kind of a cool design flourish where they could do a lot with it. Now look at this. This is actually the pairing button so you can connect your wireless controllers. This is also an infrared receiver. So they've integrated it into the button, so it's got this nice, clean, sleek look, so you can still use any kind of multimedia remotes left over from the Xbox One days. Take a look underneath. You can, of course, sit this up vertically or lay it flat, as I'm going to be doing. And it does look like it's designed to be laid flat. Now, my biggest issue with this console is the storage capacity, and we're going to get into that more later, but this is an expansion card slot. If you guys haven't been following the new 9th generation console news, basically the story of it is all the new consoles, including the PlayStation, use super fast storage. They use proprietary storage. So gone are the days of old hard drives, and you might be thinking, well, solid state drives, SSDs, those are pretty affordable these days. Well, these are a special kind of SSD. They're NVMe 4th gen SSDs. And on top of that, they use the Xbox proprietary Velocity architecture for extra fast load times, but it comes at a cost. A 1 terabyte expansion card, which is currently all that's available, is a whopping $219. And this only includes 512 gigabytes out of the box. And that's a big part of the reason why I recommend you get the Series X over the S, unless you're like me and this is a secondary console. Of course, we have an Ethernet port, and of course this does have Wi-Fi, although it is not Wi-Fi 6 compatible, which I'm really disappointed to see. We get 2 high-speed USB ports on the back, 1 in the front, and an HDMI out. And this does use the exact same power cord as the Xbox One S and One X. So you can reuse that from your old console if needed. And of course we get a controller and an instruction manual, an HDMI 2.1 cable, and a power cord are going to round it out. You guys already know what those things look like. So let's take a look at and enjoy this controller. It is very, very slightly smaller than the Xbox One controller, very slightly. You will notice it. You will notice a difference. It has an extremely clicky D-pad with this 3-dimensional shape to it so that the center is concave and then you get this edging around. It feels very comfortable. It's weird, it feels different, but it's very comfortable. And it has a new share button. I don't really care about that. You've always been able to hit the home button and then hit the Y button to take screenshots and stuff, but this is just an easier way to hit share. PlayStation 4 pioneered the ability to hit share from one button. Yay. Don't care too much about that. I care more about how the controller feels. It feels very solid. It's got the asymmetrical joysticks the Xbox is known for. Personal preference for me is I much prefer this over the symmetrical joysticks of PlayStation. But you guys already knew that. If you're looking at this video, you already know what time it is on Xbox, and you know whether or not you like that joystick layout. The bumpers and the triggers are interesting for two reasons. One, I don't know if the camera will pick this up. There is just a tiny bit of texturing on this front lip. It almost makes it feel rubberized, and the same texturing is in here on the inside grips. This is bright white, it is matte white, and it also features texturing. So guess what's gonna be picking up oil off your hand? This controller. I don't know how much longer this thing's gonna look perfectly white, but hopefully it's designed to ward off any kind of grease. We'll let you guys know how it works over time after I've had more time to play with it. There is a USB Type-C charging port, which is nice. But back to these triggers, the other reason these are nice, they have motorized feedback, so it has adaptive pressure. Basically, if you're playing a racing game and you hit your brakes, but your wheels are kind of spinning out crazy, you're gonna feel that in the trigger. Now on paper, the Xbox One triggers had this too, but I tested this earlier with Forza Horizon 4. Let me tell you, this feels completely different than the old joystick. So I don't know if they have better motors in here or it's a software change, but these things are rock solid. The triggers feel great, and they feel great in games like Forza Horizon that take advantage of that proprietary feature. All right, so that is it on the controller. Let's go ahead and take a look at gameplay itself. So next I'm gonna power up the console just so you can see how quickly this turns on. And notably, by turning on the console, I'm also turning on my television and my soundbar, and I'm doing that with a technology called HDMI CEC. Nerd! That allows you to control electronics through an HDMI signal, but it is complicated, and using this feature is going to be variable depending on what kind of TV you have, depending on what kind of sound system you have. It's all different, and to be honest, it took me a couple hours to figure it out. It's not always simple. You've got to have just the right ports being used, just the right settings enabled, but it is possible. So I'm gonna hit power now, and you're gonna see how quickly this turns on and how quickly it turns on my whole system. Boom. About 2 seconds.
About 350.
And I love that control because I can use this controller and turn everything on, or you can use a media remote like what I have here. Now, there is no official Xbox Series media remote, which I think is kind of stupid. PlayStation 5 is coming with their media remote. But if you're gonna use your console for a lot of stuff other than gaming, I do think it's helpful to have that remote. But next, let's jump into Forza Horizon 4. This had notoriously long load times for the last gen Xbox. Let's see how it goes now, and pressing A. And it's up. Now you can see it still takes a few seconds to actually get in the game, but this is worlds different than I had in my old Xbox One console. It's a big part of the reason why I wanted to upgrade now. It's true that there aren't going to be a lot of exclusive next generation games anytime soon, but the games that were made for old platforms are going to run better than ever on these new consoles. Now, notably, you're not going to get 4K rendering here in a game like this. The Series S is capable of 4K outputs, but you're not going to get 4K in any kind of serious or demanding game like Forza Horizon. If we ever do get 4K on the Series S, it's going to be on like 2D style games. All right, now why do I recommend you get the Series X and not the Series S? You might be thinking, hey, this thing runs 4K, but not for every game, but maybe I don't care about 4K. Maybe you don't even have a 4K television. Well, here's why. Number one, storage. You're getting 1 terabyte of storage here. You are getting 512 gigs. And usable, you're really getting about 450 gigabytes. Now, these new games, we know they're just going to get bigger as texture files get larger, games get more complex. That's always the trend. Game save files get bigger and bigger. And if you want that storage card, it is going to cost you. That right there is the difference between the S and the X in terms of price. And in fact, the X is going to be slightly cheaper than the S with that storage card. The other reason I think you want the X, well, it's future proof. If you're going to spend $300 to $500, why not get the console of the future? You know, if you don't have a 4K TV now, you almost can't buy a television these days that isn't 4K. So I would just assume if you're buying high-end consoles like this anyway, probably at some point your next TV is going to be 4K, and it's good to be prepared for that. But it also just has a ton more graphics processing. It's over double the GPU power. So that's not just about resolution, it's also about the quality of the graphics you're going to see on screen. In fact, the only thing really linking these two consoles together, other than their operating system is the same, is their CPU is identical, which means you'll always be able to play the same games on the Series S as the Series X. You're always going to have the same experience, but they're going to look a lot better on the Series X, whether you're running in 4K or not. Now, both consoles do support 120 frames per second. I don't yet own a television that is 120 frames per second. My home theater TV downstairs, where I'm going to put my Series X, is a 60 frames per second 4K OLED. So it's got a great picture, but it's only 60 frames a second. And I got to tell you, since this is out, I am going to be itching to upgrade that and take advantage of that 120 frames per second. Quick thoughts on the dashboard. It does not render in 4K on the Series X or the Series S, and it does not leverage HDR. If you guys aren't familiar with HDR, it stands for high dynamic range. It simply means you're going to get a wider contrast ratio. In other words, brighter brights and darker darks. It's an important part of graphics fidelity. It's what makes games look really great. It, in fact, makes them look significantly better when they leverage HDR, as this game, Ori the Will of the Wisps, does. So why couldn't they bring HDR, let alone 4K resolution, into the dashboard? I don't really understand why. It's certainly not a deal breaker for anybody, but you would think that they'd want to bring all that technology into the dashboard. Speaking of the dashboard, it runs significantly smoother than the previous console. It's just so fast. It feels like there's absolutely no loading time. Everything pops up right away. If you guys have been longtime Xbox One fans, then you know for a long time we've suffered with a very, very sluggish dashboard. And thankfully, thanks to the new CPU and the NVMe hard drive or solid state disk, we're not going to have that problem anymore. Final thoughts. Why did I select the Xbox over PlayStation? Well, partly, I'm just a little biased. I like the Xbox brand. I've been into it since the original Xbox, kind of going back to way back when PS2 buried my beloved Dreamcast. So I'm a little bit of a fanboy. I'm not going to tell you guys I'm super objective, compare all the consoles. Truth is, I wasn't going to buy the PS5 almost no matter what. However, I will tell you some reasons why I do think the Xbox is worth your consideration. Number one, the hardware. It's this weird middle ground between Fisher-Price and like super sleek and futuristic. But that's a good thing. It actually looks and feels really, really nice. And the PS5 by comparison is substantially larger, giant plastic fest. You may not care about looks. That's probably not the main reason to buy a console, but it's something to consider. The Xbox has done a great job at building increasingly compact hardware. The Xbox One X was actually smaller than the One S, even though it was way more powerful. They've had no overheating issues ever since Phil Spencer took over Xbox, starting with the One S. They run quiet. They're pretty reliable. They have been in the past, so I have reason to believe this hardware will be too. But overall, it just feels very, very premium. That's the hardware side of things. And I happen to prefer the controller, but that's completely subjective. You may prefer the PS5 controller. Sony does have an increasingly concerning habit of censoring games. They've done that with a lot of Japan waifu type games. You might care about that stuff or you might not, but in general, I really don't like censoring from these companies. So I'm happy to see that Xbox hasn't gotten into that in the same way Sony has. I hope that continues for Xbox. And honestly, I hope Sony reverses course because I think it's a big mistake. There have even been games that were much more censored on the PlayStation than they were on Nintendo Switch, which is just insane to think about. I mean, to this day, we still talk about the censoring of blood in Mortal Kombat on Super Nintendo. But, you know, censoring still happens today in gaming, and really, we ought to care about that and make that known so these companies knock this off. But right now, Sony is by far the worst on censorship. Also, Microsoft has bought 16 game studios in the last year or so. That's going to come to fruition with a lot of games. Now, whether the type of games you guys want or like, I don't know. But buying Bethesda was enormous. And on top of that, they picked up Team Ninja. They picked up a ton of great devs. They're going to be pimping out a lot of really good games, I hope, over the next few years. But it is going to take time. And the reality is, with any new gen console you pick up right now, there aren't going to be a lot of awesome games to play that you couldn't play on the older gen console. So if you're not hype about new hardware, it really does probably make sense to hold off altogether. I like new hardware. I have a pretty high-end gaming PC. I bought that knowing it was going to play all the same games my old gaming PC was going to play, but it was just going to run everything so much faster, so much smoother, more frame rate, better resolution, and overall just better responsiveness and graphics. To me, that's worth it, and I like having a console I can turn on. It's instant, and I don't have to sit around and wait for an hour like the Xbox One, which is just so sluggish with that 7-year-old CPU and that old school 5400 RPM hard drive. So I like the new hardware, and that's why I jumped into this. I really want to get the Series X, but I'm going to be out hustling trying to pick one of those up at midnight another day when more inventory drops. Let me know what you guys think. This is by no means definitive. This isn't a review. I just got the console, and at the end of the day, I don't really think you can review something like this. A games console, a modern games console, it's so big and sprawling. You got to look at the kind of games you can play. You've got to look at the online services that come with that. I haven't mentioned Game Pass at all, but Game Pass is, I think, a really good reason to jump into Xbox. Sony has their equivalent service. It just has fewer high-end games. They don't give you day one releases of the new hits. So it can be seen as a more sort of wallet-friendly option, since you get that Game Pass for $10 a month. You get access to a bunch of games. But I can't review it because you might not care about Game Pass. You might only have certain specific types of games. If you're into third-person cinematic, sort of mature themed games, there's no question PlayStation's going to be the only console you're going to want. You're not going to want to look at Nintendo, and you're not going to want to look at the Xbox. But if you're into online or open world type games, then Xbox is a good option to check out. So again, not a review, but wanted to give you guys my view that why I bought the Xbox, why I kind of shill and like the Xbox brand, and that the new hardware is actually pretty slick. I look forward to playing with it more. I look forward to getting that Series X hopefully soon. Wish me luck, and I wish you guys luck, whatever it is you're trying to buy this holiday season. If it's retro gaming hardware like these pinballs are going to be hard to find, or a new console, which is also hard to find, good luck. The hunt's always just as fun as actually getting the stuff. And with all that, I'll talk to you guys next time.